A while back we did a video teaching you how to drive a manual transmission, which sadly is becoming a lost art as more and more manufacturers no longer offer that manual transmission option. Now luckily with the S650 Mustang, you can still get a manual transmission in the Mustang GT and the Mustang Dark Horse, but if you want an EcoBoost, you're gonna have to find a used 23 as the manual is no longer available. And while today's automatics and the DCT transmissions might be faster, there's nothing that beats the driver engagement of a manual. You can't power shift an automatic, you can't heel toe an automatic. Now a lot of those terms you may not be familiar with, but there's a lot of things you can do with a stick shift car that you can't do in an automatic. So we're gonna talk about clutch engagement, and then we're talking about some of those things in this video. So before we get into the terms, let's talk about clutch engagement, how it actually works. So basically, clutch engagement is when your clutch is pushed down against the flywheel and power is being transmitted from the engine through the clutch and transmission to the drive shaft. Clutch ditch engagement is when you push the pedal in and the plates separate. So when you engage the clutch, basically the pressure plate through the throwout bearing, it allows the clutch disc to touch the flywheel. When you press the clutch in, it's going to separate. So the engagement is what allows you to put power to the ground, and there's a lot more to the engagement. So let's start by talking about terms related to clutch engagement. We're going to start with slipping the clutch, also known as feathering the clutch. Now, slipping the clutch is a perfectly normal part of driving a stick shift car, yet a slipping clutch is a very, very bad thing, and the terms are familiar, which makes it kind of confusing. So slipping the clutch or feathering the clutch is basically when you release the clutch pedal, but you don't completely disengage it. You'll hear the RPMs go up, the car's going to start moving, but the RPMs are kind of holding because the clutch is still slightly engaged. So power is getting through, but not all the power. Now this is going to happen during normal driving pretty much almost all the time in first gear. Because when you let out of first gear, because of the gear ratios, first gear is the most challenging gear, so you do have to slip it just right. Now slipping can be a very popular thing for race drivers because slipping at a higher level can actually make the car faster because it puts less power to the ground immediately, which helps with traction. There are even devices you can attach to your clutch that will do this automatically for drag racing. But for normal use, again, slipping the clutch is perfectly acceptable. Now a slipping clutch is the exact opposite. A slipping clutch means you have the clutch fully engaged. Your foot is off the pedal, but the car is still revving up and not moving forward. That means one of two things. The clutch is either set up wrong, which is not usually likely. The second thing though is that clutch is just worn out. There's no more material left on that clutch, and when you release the pedal to engage the clutch, the material is going to slip and you can't put power to the ground. And again, usually that means it's time for a new clutch. Another term we're going to discuss that can do serious damage to your clutch and even your transmission is riding the clutch. Now riding is the same principle as slipping the clutch. But when you release the clutch, you get that little slip before it engages. Riding is getting in that zone where it slips and keeping it there. You hear the revs go up, the car's moving, but the clutch is not disengaging as it should. You're basically still riding the clutch by keeping enough engagement on it that it won't fully disengage. Now also riding the clutch can be driving around with your foot resting on the clutch pedal, which can cause a minimal amount of damage over time because the clutch is slightly disengaged. But riding the clutch will heat up the clutch and cause it to wear out in a hurry. The next we're going to talk about is double clutching, because double clutching is something that a lot of people are very confused about. I blame the Fast and Furious where they're saying, you're not double clutching like you should. First of all, you would never ever double clutch in a drag race, so that saying makes absolutely no sense. But that could be a whole nother video on what is wrong with the Fast and Furious. But again, talking about double clutching, it originally was designed for truckers. Because of unsynchronized transmissions, you had to double clutch to get the car to go in gear properly. So what is it as far as maybe a performance application? Well, double clutching is designed basically for an unsynchronized transmission. So your modern transmission has synchronizers in it that if the car is, the RPMs are not quite right, it'll still allow your car to go in gear. So double clutching, the best way I can explain it to you is imagine you're driving in fourth gear and you're at 2,000 RPM. Downshift in the third, let the clutch out, it's going to go to, we'll say 4,000 RPM. So what double clutching does is the rule is you try to get the RPMs where they would be on a shift. So if you're in fourth gear, you basically would clutch, put the car in neutral, hit the revs to about where it should be, so about 2,000 RPM higher, and then put it in third gear and release the clutch. That is basically double clutching. You're going from the gear to neutral to the gear. And the goal of it is if you have the RPM where it's going to be naturally, it's much less wear and tear on the clutch. But obviously, again, this is something designed for downshifting you would never want to do in a drag race, so again, it makes no sense in the movie. But basically, I said double clutching because of synchros isn't really necessary. Some people will still do it because it will save some wear and tear on the transmission. But again, it's not common and it's definitely not a performance application. Now, if you're talking about something similar for performance application, that would be heel-toe shifting. So heel-toe is going to follow a similar principle of having the RPMs at the right point when you do a downshift. But again, this is more for road course, autocross, high-performance driving. The theory here again is, have the RPMs right, but you're going to use your foot on basically two pedals at the same time to do so. So let me explain. You're coming into a corner, we're going to say you're in fourth gear again. You know, you're at the higher RPM, you're coming down, you're going to take your foot off and you're going to put your toe on the brake and start pushing the brake to slow down. As you start sharing speed, you get to a point where the RPMs are going to drop and you could go to a lower gear. So here's where the heel toe comes into place. You're going to put your toe on the brake and then slide your heel over to the gas while you're pressing the clutch. The goal here is to use the throttle with your heel to get the RPMs up to where you'd want them to be for that downshift. It makes for a much smoother downshift, also doesn't shave a lot of speed because the engine's not bringing the car down. If you ever downshifted a gear normally, you'll notice that as you downshift, you're going to shave speed because the engine is going to slow the vehicle down. By getting the RPMs up where they should be, it's going to allow for much faster. Now, heel toe will take a lot of practice. I mean, professionals can get it right every time, but it does take some work to learn because it's basically a dance with your feet to do it right. But once you get that form down, it will make the car a lot faster through corners. Speaking of racing in clutch terms, let's get back to one of the more fun ones, and that is dumping the clutch, also known as sidestepping or popping the clutch. The goal here is to get your foot off the clutch as fast as possible. Some people slide their foot to the side, some people just lift their foot off very, very quickly. But you're gonna do this mainly for drag racing, but it's also popular for drifting, or if you just wanna do a burnout, it's the way to do it. You're gonna rev the car up, pop that clutch, and most times you're gonna get tire smoke. Now again, you can do a neutral slam in an automatic and get kind of the same effect, or go to a trans brake, that's a whole other conversation, but your transmission is not designed, it's not gonna hold up. For a clutch, if done properly, you can pop it pretty much as many times as you want to. Now, in a drag racing application, when you pop that clutch, your tires and your suspension are meant for it, and hopefully you're gonna get traction to go down the drag strip. If you're doing that with a normal street tire, you're just gonna basically blow the tires off because they cannot take that shock of that instant hit on the clutch. But again, it's a lot of fun, and drifting and all these other sports that basically revolve around tire smoke rely on popping or kicking the clutch quite often. Now, kicking the clutch is kind of the same thing, but that's more when you're in motion. So if you're driving, you're already in gear, you're gonna kick that clutch to get the RPMs to pop up, and then again, pop it right back out again, and that is gonna make it easier to get the tires spinning and the car going sideways. But again, these are all things you don't really want to try until you're comfortable or you're doing it in the proper environment. But again, popping the clutch can be a lot of fun. So since we're talking about drag racing and other fun things you can do in a stick shift you can't do in an automatic, let's talk about power shifting and speed shifting. Now again, these terms are also sometimes interchanged, but they kind of mean the same thing. The goal is to basically shift as fast as possible without taking your foot off the gas. Now, speed shifting usually means you lift the gas a little bit. Power shifting, your foot is on the floor and you're clutching the car and shifting as quick as possible. This is very popular again for drag racing because every little tenth of a second, hundredth of a second is gonna count. So speed shifting or power shifting, particularly power shifting, is gonna keep the car in that higher RPM band and get you into that next gear as fast as possible. Now again, just like heel toe and other things, it does take some work to learn how to power shift or speed shift properly. And unlike heel toe, it's very easy to damage your car learning how to power shift or speed shift. I mean, again, it's an art to hit that clutch, get to the next gear, and get off the clutch as fast as possible, because as soon as the clutch is in, the car's in neutral, so the RPMs are gonna go up. So you have to be very careful of RPM limiters. You don't want to bang the limiter, you want to be careful with the clutch. You also can damage the transmission if you release that clutch and you're not in the next gear. So like I said, for a drag racing application, power shifting and speed shifting, very, very important for going fast. But again, you want to be very careful when doing so. And like I said before, there's a lot more to driving in manual than there is to driving in automatic. And while you gotta respect the speed of the automatic, you can't argue with the fact that that perfect shift or that perfect downshift, there's just something about it. And while we love automatics, again, you gotta respect their speed. There's definitely something about a manual transmission.